Batman vs. Superman was just a disaster, and while it did have some good and even great moments, it was overall just pretty terrible. Basically everything that you tell a comic book movie not to do, it did. And when it should have learned from the mistakes of movies like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or Iron Man 2 or Man of Steel, it just commits all the same crimes that those movies did. Now, first a preface. As I said, there are good elements in this movie. There's a pretty good courthouse scene. There's a car chase that's pretty well done, I guess. Ben Affleck does a good job, but I'm not gonna focus on all that because, well, I'm focusing on correcting the mistakes of Batman v Superman, not praising the tiny good moments in an overall disaster. So, let's get started with the 3 deadly sins of Batman v Superman. Be careful for spoilers here. Number 1. What the heck is going on? It baffles me that there's going to be a 3-hour extended edition of this already 2.5-hour movie. Like, did they not jam enough in already? So there are 2 elements to this part of the critique. One is that there's just so much going on in this movie.
It's so dense, every single image has so many things going on.
And 2 is that, well, all of it is so complicated that unless you're deeply connected and on top of all the folklore of DC Comics, it would never make sense to you. The first is perhaps the biggest problem with the film of all. Jammed into it, we have Justice League setups, Lois Lane subplots, Darkseid setups, Wonder Woman setups, Doomsday showing up at the end, and all of it just doesn't fit together. The movie feels like a string of scenes just put together in no particular order, and all of the Justice League setup stuff with the dreams and premonitions could have been written post-haste after the movie was filmed, for all I know. They're that unconnected to the story. And this is where the movie starts to go off the rails, because you can have a movie with a lot of stuff packed into it, and sometimes it will work, but when the stuff packed into it is completely unrelated to the next thing and just shoehorned in to set up future films, it makes the audience go, what? A good movie works setups and Easter eggs into the story in ways that feel organic, not forced, like in Captain America the Winter Soldier when Sitwell starts naming off the people that the algorithm targets.
Bruce Banner, Stephen Strange, anyone who's a threat to Hydra.
A good movie doesn't resort to such a lazy option as Wonder Woman reading an email or Batman having a dream. I can't even imagine how a non-fan must feel walking out of the theater. Like, what? Number 2, story structure. See, we here in the business, we have this thing we create in film. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called, a story. See, stories are useful because without one, you can't have really much of a movie, and the entire thing just becomes a string of scenes cut together. If you didn't know, stories have been used for hundreds of years. Basically, they're works of fiction that have a beginning, middle, and end. Greeks and Romans told them a lot, and so do politicians today.
2 waiters came up to me tonight. Mr. Trump, we love you. I said, where are you from? Mexico. I said, that's great. I love you too.
The problem with the story in this movie is that for the first 2 acts, we're not really building toward anything. Sure, we know Superman and Batman are eventually going to fight, but until about 10 minutes before it happens, there's really not much build-up. And when it all comes down to it, all the scenes are pointless anyway and really only exist to exist. Congress explodes so that Lex can frame Superman, and then 5 minutes later the news realizes Superman didn't do it, so that scene didn't matter. A nuke is fired at Doomsday and Superman, and both of them survive and come back to Earth just to keep fighting again like nothing happened at all. Anyway, in a story there are these things called, characters. And characters have these things called character arcs. This means they change throughout the course of the movie, and all good movies realize this. Even a lesser superhero movie, like Thor the Dark World, realizes the characters need to have arcs. In Thor 2, Thor starts out wanting the throne, and at the end he's willing to give it all up just to be with Jane and protect Earth. It's a simple, dumb character arc, but at least it exists. Here, there's nothing. I've racked my brain searching for character arcs, and the best I can find is that at the beginning of the movie, Bruce Wayne is kind of like, well, good guys don't exist. And at the end, he's kind of like, well, I guess good guys kind of exist. But he's the only one with really anything. Superman stays the good and honest and self-sacrificial guy. Wonder Woman stays, unexplained. Lex Luthor stays evil. What's more, none of them have any motivation. At least Thor wanted to protect the Earth because he's attached to one of its citizens, Jane Foster. Here, Lex Luthor just wants to kill Superman because he's Lex Luthor. And Batman wants to kill Superman because the plot says he does. And Wonder Woman wants to save the world because it's written in the script. Number 3. Who's driving the car?
Hey, who's driving that car?
So I had avoided until this point comparing this movie with Marvel Studios, because I don't want to seem like a Marvel fanboy, but all bias and love for the studio aside, they've done a much better job at this whole let's make movies thing than DC has. And I can tell you why that is. It's because they've got someone driving the ship, and they've got a league of visionaries by his side. Marvel Studios is controlled, created, and formed by its president, Kevin Feige, who is pretty much the Walt Disney of the company, the man with the vision. And so, under his guidance, the company has been able to flourish and hire other talented people to help him out and fill the gaps in his skill set. With the DC universe, there's really nobody in command other than, like, Zack Snyder driving the car. And with him being the sole influence on the company, he's a director with a lot of power. And we all know what happens when you give a director too much power.
I may have gone too far in a few places. Jar Jar is a key to all this. If we get Jar Jar working.
Look, my point is, Marvel flourishes because it's got a working body. Kevin Feige is the big brain of the thing, but then people like Jon Favreau, James Gunn, Joss Whedon, the Russo brothers are the hands and feet that really make everything happen and insert their own visions into the whole thing. With DC, we've got kind of a right brain, and then maybe a nose, and then maybe like some eyelids, and like a spleen. So, no one is really overseeing this universe. No one knows what they're doing other than Zack Snyder. And at this point, I think he's so much of a DC fanboy that he's just ceased to be an artist and just become a guy who says, that would be cool, and just does what he thinks would be cool. There was no president of DC who had time to tell him this.
Captain Marvel, ever in the script?
In an early draft of the script, yes.
Okay. And any particular reason? Was it about you hadn't found the Captain Marvel yet, or?
We didn't want to introduce her fully formed flying in a costume before you got to know who she was or how she came to be.
Right.
Sound familiar, Zach? Ding, 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 ding. Do you hear the bells? So yeah, this movie is a total disaster. And there are so many more reasons why. Like how there's no consistency to whether the public Wonder Woman is just Superman, Martha Wayne just shows up Batman, Superman, Jimmy There's so many dreams the whole movie. But these are the basics. Look, I'm not happy to say that it was bad. I genuinely gave it a chance and wanted it to be good. And I sort of have hope for Wonder Woman or The Flash because they're directed by new people. But for now, I'm just going to try to think about better movies like The Dark Knight or Captain America the Winter Soldier. I mean, until DC proves themselves, I'm not very optimistic about Zack Snyder's Justice League.